Crax the Magnificent, three-time winner of the Galactic Broadcasting Excellence Award, stood before his studio audience with all four arms spread wide in what he considered his most dramatic pose. His iridescent scales caught the studio lights perfectly, which was exactly why he'd paid for the expensive gene mod in the first place. "Welcome, welcome, welcome to Survival Impossible." His voice boomed through the arena, and the crowd of 70,000 aliens from 200 different species erupted in cheers. The show where we take the galaxy's bravest warriors and drop them onto planets that actively hate biological life. The screens behind him flashed images of previous contestants. Well, images of what was left of previous contestants. Crax had learned early in his career that viewers loved a good tragedy, especially when it happened to someone else. Today, my delicious audience, we have something special. Crax's translator implant worked overtime to convert his excitement into 1,200 different languages simultaneously. Our destination is Carvath 9, a Class 12 death world where the survival rate is, and I checked this twice, 0% for anything with a central nervous system. More cheers. Crax lived for this. And our contestants. He gestured dramatically to the holding area. First, we have Thress, a Vorgian crystal warrior whose people are literally made of living diamond. She has defeated entire armies and survives by absorbing stellar radiation. She volunteered for this because, and I quote, she was bored. Thress stepped forward, her crystalline body refracting light into rainbow patterns. She looked appropriately stoic and battle-ready, which was great for the cameras. Second, we have Quill, a Nexarian strategist with 17 brains distributed throughout his tentacle structure. His species once calculated the precise trajectory needed to collapse a star. He's here because he bet his colleagues he could survive anywhere with pure intellect alone. Quill rippled forward, his tentacles moving in a way that suggested either supreme confidence or barely controlled terror. Crax honestly couldn't tell and didn't care. And finally, Crax paused for maximum dramatic effect. We have Jake Hendricks, a human from the planet Earth. The audience went silent. Confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. Jake shuffled onto the stage wearing cargo shorts, a faded t-shirt with something called a Metallica on it, and the most battered pair of sneakers Crax had ever seen. He looked around the studio with mild confusion, like someone who'd taken a wrong turn on the way to literally anywhere else. Jake said, scratching his head. Is this where the bathroom is? Because I've been walking for like 20 minutes and your signs make no sense. Crax's marketing team had found Jake wandering the station 3 hours ago. When they'd explained the show's premise, apparently Jake had laughed and said something about it sounding easier than his last camping trip. He'd signed the waiver while asking if there was prize money, and Crax had gleefully accepted because humans were rumored to be from a rough planet, and this would be incredible for ratings. Looking at Jake now, Crax was having second thoughts. The human looked like he'd never seen the inside of a gym and couldn't fight his way out of a wet paper bag, whatever that meant. Jake Hendricks, human. You have volunteered to face Carvath 9 with 0 equipment, 0 supplies, and 0 chance of rescue for 72 hours. Do you understand the terms? Jake shrugged. Yeah, sure. Honestly sounds like basically camping. Do you guys have those little energy bar things? I skipped lunch. Crax blinked all 3 of his eyes in sequence. Camping. You think a Class 12 death world is camping? I mean, Class 12 sounds bad, but my uncle took me to Glacier National Park once in bear season with nothing but a knife and some attitude. How different can it be? The audience laughed. They thought the human was joking. Crax checked his notes. Earth was listed as Class 11, which seemed impossible. Nothing actually lived on Class 11 death worlds. They were nature preserves for extreme bacteria. Well then, Crax decided to lean into it. If the human died immediately, at least it would be memorable. Contestants, you have 60 seconds to say your final words before we drop you into hell itself. Use them wisely. Thress spoke in a deep, resonating tone. I will bring honor to my people and prove that Vorgian strength conquers all. Quill's translator device clicked rapidly. Through superior intellect and strategic thinking, I shall demonstrate the power of pure reason over base survival instinct. Jake looked at the camera and waved. Hey, Mom, I'm gonna be on TV. Still not sure what channel. Also, I'm fine. This is fine. Please don't freak out when you see this. Crax grinned with all 3 rows of teeth. This was either going to be the best episode ever or the shortest one. Either way, the ratings were going to be incredible. The transport pod screamed through Carvath 9's atmosphere like a meteor with a death wish, which was appropriate given where it was headed. Inside, 3 contestants gripped their harnesses while Krax's voice boomed through the speakers with the enthusiasm of someone who wasn't about to be dropped onto a planet nicknamed the Widowmaker's angrier cousin. Contestants, you are now entering the upper atmosphere of Carvath 9. Atmospheric composition is 60% nitrogen, 30% oxygen, and 10% things that will absolutely melt your respiratory system. Surface temperature ranges from uncomfortably hot to surprise lava. Native predators include the Carvath Ripper, the Spine Crawler, and my personal favorite, the Dread Maw, which has a 100% kill rate against anything dumb enough to set foot on this rock. Thress's crystalline face somehow managed to look grim. Quill had wrapped 6 of his tentacles around the safety bar so tightly that the metal was starting to bend. Jake was looking out the window like a tourist on a sightseeing tour. "Huh," he said. "Looks kind of like British Columbia. Does it rain a lot here?" "The forecast calls for acid rain in approximately 6 hours, Krax announced cheerfully, "which will strip flesh from bone in under 30 seconds. So yes," Jake nodded. "Definitely like BC. The pod hit the ground with an impact that would have killed anything not strapped in. The doors blew open with a hiss of hydraulics, and suddenly the contestants were breathing Carvath 9's air, which smelled like a combination of rotting vegetation, sulfur, and what Jake would later describe as if a gym bag could decompose. Thress immediately activated her combat protocols, her body shifting into a defensive crystalline formation. Quill extended his sensory tentacles, analyzing everything within a 100-meter radius, while his 17 brains worked overtime calculating threats. Jake stepped out, looked around, and sneezed. "Okay, little Dusty, but honestly, not that bad. I was expecting more fire." "The contestants have landed," Krax's voice echoed from the hovering camera drones. "Thress has assumed a defensive position. Quill is conducting environmental analysis, and the human is— Wait, what is the human doing?" Jake had wandered about 10 feet from the pod and was examining a fallen tree branch. He tested its weight, nodded approvingly, and started looking around on the ground for something. Is he looking for sticks?" Krax sounded genuinely confused. Across the galaxy, millions of viewers are asking the same question. Why is he looking for sticks? "Human Jake!" Quill's translator crackled. "We must formulate a survival strategy immediately. The sun will set in 4 hours, and nocturnal predators are 70% more aggressive than diurnal ones." Yeah, totally." Jake found another stick and held it up to examine it. "First things first, though. We need fire. Well, I need fire. You guys can do whatever." Thress's voice resonated like a gong. "Fire? How do you propose to create fire with no tools?" Jake sat down cross-legged and started stripping bark off one of the sticks. "Friction, same way humans have been doing it for like 200,000 years. You just need the right materials and a little patience." He carved a small divot in a flat piece of bark using a sharp rock, then started spinning a straight stick in the depression with his palms. Back and forth, with the focused intensity of someone who'd done this before. "This is insane," Quill muttered. "The human is attempting to create combustion through manual friction. The energy required alone." Smoke started rising from the bark. "No way," Krax breathed, and across the galaxy, 70 billion beings leaned closer to their screens. Jake kept spinning, faster now, then carefully transferred the smoking ember to a small pile of dried grass and moss he'd gathered. He blew on it gently, coaxing it like he was talking to a nervous cat, and suddenly there was flame. "Fire," Jake announced, adding more material to build it up. "Step 1 of camping complete. Now we need water and shelter before dark." Thress and Quill stared at the flames like they were witnessing some kind of dark magic. Jake stood up and brushed off his shorts. "Oh, I can hear running water from here. Stream's probably 100 yards that way." He pointed northeast without hesitation. "You can hear water from 100 yards away?" Quill's translator almost glitched on the question. "Yeah, you can't? Weird." Jake started walking. "Come on, daylight's burning." He found the stream exactly where he said it would be, a clear ribbon of water flowing over smooth rocks. Jake knelt down, cupped his hands, and took a drink. Both aliens made sounds of absolute horror. "Human Jake has just consumed unfiltered water from an alien planet!" Krax was practically screaming into the broadcast. "The microbial content alone should kill him in minutes. This is unprecedented." Jake wiped his mouth. Tastes fine. Little mineral-y, but I've had worse from the tap in Flint. He looked back at the other two. You guys want some? It's cold. Pretty refreshing, actually. I am a crystalline being, Thress managed. I do not require water. I filter nutrients from atmospheric particulates, Quill added weakly. Cool, more for me then. Jake took another long drink, then started examining the plants growing along the stream bank. Okay, this one looks like cattails, which means edible roots. These berries are probably fine, and that tree bark is definitely good for tea if we boil it. How, Quill said slowly, can you possibly know which alien plants are safe to consume? Jake shrugged. I don't, really. But these look similar enough to Earth stuff, and honestly, the ones that kill you usually have specific warning signs. Bright colors, weird smells, milky sap. These seem okay. Seem okay, Krax repeated faintly. The human is gambling his life on seem okay. Viewers, I cannot stress enough that this is not recommended survival strategy for anyone, anywhere, ever. But Jake was already gathering materials, humming something under his breath that sounded vaguely like music. He built up the fire, found a flat rock to heat water on, and started constructing what looked like a shelter frame using branches and vine-like plants. The sun was starting to set, painting Carvath 9's sky in shades of purple and orange that would have been beautiful if they didn't signal the arrival of everything that wanted to eat them. And Jake Hendricks, human from Earth, was treating it like a regular Tuesday evening in the woods. Krax checked the viewer metrics. They'd already broken every record in the show's history. Okay, the host muttered to himself. Okay, this is fine. This is great television. Nothing could possibly make this stranger. That's when the screaming started. The screaming, as it turned out, was coming from the forest about 50 yards away. It was the kind of screaming that suggested something with too many teeth and not enough manners had decided to introduce itself to the local wildlife. Thress immediately shifted into combat mode, her crystalline body extending sharp edges in every direction. Quill pulled all his tentacles in tight, making himself as small as possible while his brains calculated 17 different escape routes simultaneously. Jake looked up from the shelter he was building, listened for a second, and went back to tying vines. Human Jake! Thress's voice resonated with urgency. A predator approaches. Yeah, sounds like it. Jake tested a knot. Probably hunting that thing that was screaming. We should be fine if we don't act like prey. Don't act like prey? Krax's voice cracked through the camera drones. Viewers, for those just joining us, the human has just suggested that the correct response to a Carvath Ripper is to simply not act like prey. I don't even know what to say to that. The Ripper burst through the tree line like a nightmare someone had welded razor blades to. It was 7 feet of scaled muscle, teeth, and what appeared to be bone spurs growing at random intervals across its body. Its eyes glowed a sickly yellow in the fading light, and it moved with the twitchy aggression of something that had never been told no in its entire life. It spotted the camp immediately. More specifically, it spotted 3 potential meals sitting around a fire like idiots. The Ripper charged. Thress braced for impact. Quill made a sound that his translator refused to process, and Jake picked up a rock about the size of a softball and threw it with the casual accuracy of someone who'd spent his childhood playing baseball. The rock hit the Ripper square in the face with a meaty thunk. The creature stopped, shook its head, and made a confused, chirping sound. Hey! Jake shouted, standing up and making himself bigger. Get out of here! Go on! Get! He clapped his hands loudly. The Ripper, apex predator of Carvath 9, killer of countless contestants, took 2 steps backward. Jake picked up another rock. I said, get! The Ripper, perhaps deciding that prey was not supposed to throw rocks or yell, turned around and ran back into the forest. Silence fell over the campsite. Somewhere in the galaxy, 70 billion beings collectively forgot to breathe. Krax started, then stopped. Did he just scare off a Carvath Ripper by throwing a rock and yelling at it? Jake sat back down and resumed working on the shelter. I mean, it's basically an angry lizard chicken. You just gotta show them you're not worth the trouble. My uncle taught me that with cougars. Same principle. Cougars? Thress repeated slowly. Your planet has predators. Oh yeah, tons. Bears, mountain lions, wolves, sharks, crocodiles, hippos. Hippos kill more people per year than almost anything else in Africa. Super territorial. Kind of like that guy just now, actually. Quill's translator was working overtime. Your planet has multiple apex predators? I mean, we're the apex predator, technically. We just share the space with other apex predators. It's like a whole food chain thing. Jake finished the basic shelter frame and started weaving smaller branches through it to create a waterproof layer. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, like he'd done this 100 times before. Where? Quill asked carefully. Did you learn these skills? Oh, Boy Scouts when I was a kid. Camping trips with family. Couple survival courses because my ex thought it would be a fun date idea. Spoiler alert, it was not. And that's why she's my ex. But hey, at least I learned how to build a debris hut. He stepped back to examine his work. In less than 2 hours, Jake had constructed a legitimate shelter, complete with a fire pit, water collection system using broadleaves, and what appeared to be a drying rack for food. This is better than my apartment in Seattle, Jake said proudly. And it costs $0. Take that, landlords. The night was fully dark now, and the sounds of Carvath 9's nocturnal ecosystem were ramping up. Things howled in the distance. Something with too many legs skittered past just outside the firelight. Occasionally there were sounds that suggested eating was happening somewhere unpleasantly close. Jake had fashioned a spear from a straight branch and a sharp rock he'd chipped into a blade shape. It had taken him maybe 40 seconds, and the result looked disturbingly functional. Jake said, roasting what he claimed were edible roots over the fire. This reminds me of this time in Colorado. We got stuck on a trail because of a rock slide, had to camp out for 3 days before rangers found us. No supplies, just what we could find. Actually made some pretty good friends on that trip. You were stranded in a survival situation, Quill said. And you made friends? Well, yeah, that's when you really get to know people. Nothing like imminent death to break the ice. Jake bit into a roasted root and chewed thoughtfully. These are pretty good, actually. Kind of like sweet potatoes, but nuttier. You guys sure you don't want some? A small creature, something that looked like a cross between a lizard and a very angry hedgehog, crept toward the camp. Its eyes reflected the firelight as it sniffed cautiously at the perimeter. Jake tossed it a piece of root. What are you doing? Krax practically shrieked. That's a spine crawler. Its venom can paralyze a Vorgian in seconds. The spine crawler sniffed the root, took a tentative bite, and made a pleased, chirping sound. It settled down just outside the shelter and continued eating. See? Just hungry. Everything's less murdery when it's not starving. Jake tossed it another piece. I'm gonna call him Steve. You named the venomous predator Steve, Thress said flatly. Yeah, he looks like a Steve, trust me. Steve the spine crawler finished his snack and curled up near the fire's warmth, apparently deciding that the weird, hairless thing that fed him was okay. Krax was watching the metrics flood in. Every major news network in the galaxy was running the story. The debate forums were exploding. Scientists were frantically trying to figure out how anything evolved on a Class 11 Deathworld. Anthropologists were having existential crises. And Jake Hendricks was sitting by a campfire on one of the deadliest planets in known space, feeding a venomous predator and humming classic rock songs from the 1980s. You know what the weirdest part is? Jake said to no one in particular. This is actually really relaxing. No emails, no traffic, no Karen from accounting asking about TPS reports. Just me, nature, and the constant threat of death. Honestly, kind of peaceful. In the distance, something roared. Something big. Jake looked up, listened, and shrugged. Probably just saying hi. Most predators are chill if you respect their space. Thress and Quill exchanged a look that transcended species. It was the universal expression of, are we seeing what I think we're seeing? Steve chirped contentedly by the fire. And somewhere in the forest, the dread maw began moving toward the strange new scent that had invaded its territory. Morning on Carvath 9 arrived with all the subtlety of a hangover, which is to say it was bright, unpleasant, and made you question your life choices. The sky had shifted to a sickly orange color that suggested the atmosphere was trying its best but couldn't quite commit to being fully breathable. Jake woke up, stretched, and checked the sky with the practiced eye of someone who'd learned to read weather the hard way. Yep, he announced. That's gonna rain later. The acid kind, probably. Quill, who had not slept because 13 of his 17 brains had stayed up all night calculating mortality statistics, waved a tentacle weakly. How can you possibly predict weather patterns on an alien planet after 12 hours? Sky's doing that thing, kind of yellowish-orange. That's bad news. Plus the air pressure changed, I can feel it in my knees. Jake poked the fire back to life and added more wood. We should probably build a better roof before that hits. Steve, the spine crawler, was still curled up by the fire pit, occasionally making little snuffling sounds. Jake had apparently fed him breakfast already because there were root vegetable scraps scattered nearby. The human has domesticated a spine crawler, Krax narrated in a voice that suggested he'd given up trying to make sense of anything. A creature that has killed 47 previous contestants. It is now serving as what appears to be a camp pet. Jake stood up and surveyed his handiwork from the night before. The shelter had held up well, and he'd apparently woken up early to reinforce it with extra layers of broad leaves that he'd woven together into something resembling primitive shingles. Okay, Jake said, clapping his hands together. Who wants to help me waterproof this thing? We've got maybe 3 hours before that weather hits. Thress, who had spent the night in a meditative state that her people used to conserve energy, straightened up. I will assist, though I do not understand your construction methods. It's easy. You just layer the leaves like scales on a fish, overlapping so water runs off instead of through. My dad taught me that when we built a treehouse. Jake started showing her the technique. See? Angle them down, overlap by about 3 inches, tie it off with vine. Boom, waterproof. For the next 2 hours, the 3 of them worked on the shelter. Well, Jake worked and explained. Thress tried her best but kept crushing leaves with her crystalline strength. Quill mostly handed materials up and asked increasingly existential questions about human evolution. So your species, Quill said, passing another bundle of leaves, survived on a Deathworld by simply learning to make things? I mean, yeah, kind of. We're not the strongest or fastest, and we don't have armor or venom or anything cool like that. But we've got thumbs, pattern recognition, and spite. Mostly spite, honestly. Humans are really bad at accepting that we can't do something. Spite, Quill repeated. You conquered your planet through spite. And persistence. We're persistence hunters. We just chase things until they get tired and give up. It's not fancy, but it works. The shelter was looking genuinely impressive now, a solid structure that could probably survive a decent storm. Jake had even created a small trench around it to divert water flow. That's when the first drops started falling. Acid rain! Krax's voice boomed. The forecast has arrived early. Contestants, take cover immediately or face severe chemical burns. Thress and Quill scrambled for the shelter. Jake calmly collected his tools, banked the fire to keep the coals alive under a protective rock overhang he'd apparently prepared for this exact scenario, and ushered Steve inside. The rain hit like someone had weaponized a shower. Drops sizzled where they hit exposed rock, and the vegetation that wasn't evolved to handle it started to smoke and curl. Inside the shelter, everyone was dry. Huh, Jake said, watching the rain through the entrance. pH is probably like 4 or 5. That's not too bad. I've seen worse in industrial areas back home. Your planet has acid rain? Thress asked us. I mean, we made some by accident with pollution, yeah. We're working on fixing that, mostly. Jake settled back against the shelter wall. This is actually pretty cozy. Good insulation, stays dry, even got ventilation so we don't suffocate from smoke. I give it 7 out of 10 stars on TripAdvisor. Steve curled up on Jake's lap and went to sleep. The rain continued for an hour, absolutely hammering everything outside. When it finally stopped, the landscape looked like it had been lightly pre-digested, but the shelter stood perfect and dry. Jake stepped outside, checked the sky again, and nodded in satisfaction. Okay, that should be it for today. Let's see what we can forage for lunch. That's when the ground started shaking. It wasn't an earthquake. Earthquakes were random. This was rhythmic, purposeful, the footsteps of something very large that was getting closer. Oh no, Krax whispered. Oh no, no, no. Viewers, I need you to understand what's about to happen. That is the dread Maw. It has never, and I mean never, failed to kill every living thing it encounters. It is 3 tons of murder with scales. Every contestant who has faced it has died. Every single one. The trees at the edge of the clearing bent and broke as something massive pushed through them. The dread Maw was exactly as advertised. It looked like someone had combined a T-Rex, a crocodile, and a tank, then given the result anger management issues. Its armored hide gleamed dully in the orange light. Its teeth were the size of Jake's forearm, and its eyes locked onto the camp with the focused intelligence of something that knew it was the biggest, baddest thing on the entire planet. Quill made a sound like a kettle giving up on life. Thress raised her crystalline arms, ready to die fighting. Jake looked at the dread maw, sized it up for about 5 seconds, and said, "Oh, you're just a big bear." "Just a big bear?" Krax was hyperventilating. "That is not a bear. That is certain death." "I mean, it's shaped like a bear, acts like a bear, probably thinks like a bear." Jake bent down, picked up the leftover roots and some fish he'd caught that morning, and threw them as hard as he could in the opposite direction from camp. The dread maw watched the food arc through the air and land about 30 yards away. "You're hungry, right, buddy?" Jake kept his voice calm and low. "Food's over there. Good food. Fresh food. Much better than chasing us. We're all gristle and bad attitude." The dread maw looked at Jake, then at the food, then back at Jake. "You don't want this smoke, pal," Jake continued, slowly making himself bigger by raising his arms. "We're not worth it. Trust me." For a long, eternal moment, nothing happened. Then the dread maw, apex predator of Carvath 9, undefeated champion of the murder ecosystem, walked over to the pile of food and started eating. Jake slowly backed toward the shelter, never taking his eyes off the creature. "See? You redirect the threat. Bear Safety 101. Works on almost anything that's food-motivated." The dread maw finished eating, looked at Jake one more time with what might have been respect or confusion, and wandered back into the forest. Across the galaxy, 70 billion beings sat in stunned silence. Krax's voice was barely a whisper. The human he just negotiated with the dread maw, using food. And politeness. "Yeah," Jake said, letting out a long breath. "That was definitely up there. I'd say 8 out of 10 on the scary scale. Still not as bad as that grizzly in Yellowstone, but close." Quill's tentacles were shaking. How did your species become the dominant life form on your planet?" Jake thought about it for a second. "Persistence, spite, and really good pattern recognition. Plus, we figured out early that most things just want food and territory. You work with that instead of against it, you can usually find a solution. It's not rocket science." "Your people," Thress said slowly, her voice full of something that might have been awe or horror, "are insane." "Yeah," Jake agreed cheerfully. "But we're really good at not dying, which, on Earth, is kind of the main skill you need." Steve chirped from the shelter doorway, apparently unconcerned that certain death had just visited and left. And somewhere in a broadcast studio, Krax started drafting his resignation letter. Day 3 on Carvath 9 started with what Jake would later describe as some light rumbling, which was technically accurate if you considered a volcanic eruption to be light rumbling. The mountain on the northern horizon, which had been politely dormant for the past 72 hours, decided this was a great time to remind everyone that it was, in fact, a giant angry rock filled with liquid death. Krax's voice cut through the morning air with barely controlled panic. "Attention, contestants! Carvath 9's primary volcano has entered an active phase. This is, I need to stress, not part of the planned challenge. Geological surveys indicated it was dormant for at least another century." A plume of ash and smoke rose from the mountain like a middle finger to accurate scientific predictions. "The extraction ship is being deployed immediately," Krax continued. "But due to atmospheric interference from the ash cloud, it will take approximately 6 hours to reach your location. I repeat, 6 hours. Please try not to die." Thress looked at the growing ash cloud with her crystalline equivalent of dread. 6 hours. We must survive 6 more hours on a planet that is now actively exploding. Quill had all his tentacles wrapped around himself in what was clearly an anxiety spiral. "The statistical probability of survival has dropped to 0.003%. We're doomed. We're all doomed. I should have stayed home and just admitted I was wrong about the bet." Jake was standing on a slight rise, hand shading his eyes, looking at the volcano like someone evaluating a moderately difficult hiking trail. 6 hours? That's nothing. We can do 6 hours. He turned back to the others. "Okay, so here's the deal. The lava's gonna flow downhill, obviously, which means it'll follow the natural drainage. That stream we've been using? Bad news, that's exactly where the lava wants to go." "How do you know this?" Thress asked. "I watched a documentary once. Plus, it's just basic physics. Hot stuff flows down. We need to go up and over that ridgeline." He pointed to the east. "Should keep us out of the flow path, and the elevation will help with the ash and gas." "That's 3 miles of hostile terrain," Quill calculated instantly. "With increasing seismic activity and falling ash that will reduce visibility to near zero." "Yeah, so we should probably get moving." Jake started packing up camp with practiced efficiency. He'd already fashioned a simple backpack from woven vines and was loading it with supplies. Thress, you're built tough. Can you carry the water containers? Quill, you've got all those brains. I need you navigating and watching for obstacles. I'll take point and deal with any wildlife that gets spicy. The ground shook again, harder this time. Steve chirped nervously and climbed onto Jake's shoulder, his little claws digging into Jake's shirt. Yeah, buddy, I'm not loving this either, Jake muttered. But we've got this. They started moving. The terrain was rough, covered in volcanic rock and aggressive plant life that seemed designed by a committee of sadists. The ash was already starting to fall, fine gray powder that coated everything and made breathing harder. Jake pulled his t-shirt up over his nose and mouth, making an improvised filter. Try to breathe shallow. Keep your eyes down. This ash is basically tiny glass particles. Super fun. How do you know what volcanic ash is made of? Quill wheezed. Mount St. Helens erupted in Washington in 1980. We studied it in school. Plus, there was that whole Pompeii thing, but that was before my time. They pushed forward, Jake leading them around obstacles with the confidence of someone who'd watched way too many survival shows. When they hit a particularly steep section, he used his spear to test footholds and helped pull Quill up with a rope he'd apparently braided the night before during watch. You made rope, Thress said. When did you make rope? Couldn't sleep, had extra vines, figured it might come in handy. Always make rope. That's like camping rule number 3. What's rule number 1? Quill asked. Don't die. Rule 2 is don't let your friends die. Rule 3 is rope. Everything else kind of flows from there. Behind them, the volcano was getting more aggressive. Lava had started flowing down the far side, a glowing orange river of geological rage. The heat was noticeable even from their position, and the air smelled like sulfur and burnt rock. Jake kept them moving, constantly adjusting their path based on terrain and safety. When a section of ground looked unstable, he'd test it first, then guide the others around. When visibility dropped too low, he used smoke signals he'd prepared earlier to mark their trail. Smoke signals? Crax's voice was hoarse from 3 days of continuous shocked commentary. The human prepared smoke signals as a contingency plan? When? Why? Always have a backup plan? Jake called out, apparently aware the cameras were still following them. That's rule number 7. They were halfway to the ridge when a crack opened in the ground ahead of them, a fresh volcanic vent spewing superheated gas. Okay, that's new, Jake said, eyeing the obstacle. We need to go around. Thress, how heat-resistant is your crystalline structure? I can handle up to 2,000 degrees Kelvin before I start to degrade. Fantastic. You're going first to test the temperature. Quill, you stay in the middle. Steve, buddy, you might want to get in the backpack for this part. They navigated around the vent, using Thress as a heat shield, and Jake's apparently instinctive understanding of which ground would hold their weight. It was absolutely terrifying, and Jake treated it like crossing a busy street. This is actually way better than that time I hiked Half Dome in Yosemite, Jake commented, helping Quill over a particularly treacherous section. At least here we're not waiting in line with 100 tourists. Your recreation is mountaineering, Quill shouted over the rumbling. On a planet that actively tries to kill you? I mean, yeah, it's fun. Gets you outside. Good cardio. They reached the ridgeline with an hour to spare. From their elevated position, they could see the lava flows clearly, and Jake's prediction had been exactly right. The molten rock was following the drainage paths, going exactly where their camp had been. Jake pulled out a flat piece of reflective metal he'd somehow fashioned from debris and started using it to signal, angling it to catch the sunlight that was struggling through the ash cloud. What are you doing? Thress asked. Helping the extraction ship find us. The ash is going to make it hard to see, so I'm giving them a beacon. Basic signaling. They taught us this in Boy Scouts. Boy Scouts, Crax repeated weakly. All of this was Boy Scouts. The extraction ship appeared through the ash cloud right on schedule, its engines struggling with the particulate-filled air. It landed on the ridge with all the grace of a drunk walrus, but it was there. The doors opened, and a very stressed-looking rescue coordinator waved frantically. Get in, quickly, this atmosphere is eating my hull. They scrambled aboard. Jake made sure Steve came too, because he wasn't leaving his new friend behind. As the ship lifted off, Jake looked down at Carvath 9, at the erupting volcano and the lava flows, and the absolutely hostile ecosystem that had tried its best to kill him for 3 days. You know what? Jake said, still breathing a bit hard from the climb. That was actually pretty cool. Still easier than Spirit Airlines, though. At least here, nobody charged me for baggage. Across the galaxy, 70 billion beings exhaled a breath they'd been holding for 3 days. Krax sat in his broadcast booth, staring at the metrics. Highest viewership in history. Countless scientific institutions demanding Earth's coordinates. Xenobiologists having mental breakdowns. Philosophy departments questioning the nature of survival itself. And one human, sitting in a rescue ship with a spine crawler on his lap, rating his near-death experience based on airline quality. "I quit," Krax said to no one in particular. "I'm done. I'm retiring. I'm going to open a sandwich shop on a nice, safe, boring Class 1 paradise world where nothing ever happens." But first, he had one more segment to broadcast. The post-show interview was going to be legendary. The studio audience was the largest in the history of galactic broadcasting. Standing room only, with overflow crowds watching from every screen on every civilized planet in 3 spiral arms. Scientists, politicians, military strategists, and approximately 4 billion curious citizens who just wanted to understand what the hell they'd witnessed for the past 72 hours. Krax stood on stage, his scales looking noticeably duller than they had 3 days ago. He'd aged about 10 years in 3 days, which was impressive considering his species lived for 3 centuries. "Welcome," he said, his voice hoarse but professional, "to the final episode of Survival Impossible." The audience murmured. "Final episode?" "But first, let's welcome our contestants. Thress, the Vorgian crystal warrior, who showed remarkable adaptability and courage." Thress entered to applause. She'd polished herself for the occasion and looked appropriately heroic. Quill, the Nexarian strategist, whose 17 brains helped navigate some of our most challenging obstacles. Quill rippled onto stage, still looking slightly traumatized but present. And finally, Jake Hendricks, human from Earth, who somehow survived a Class 12 Deathworld by treating it like a casual camping trip. Jake walked out wearing the same cargo shorts and Metallica shirt, now significantly more worn and ash-stained. Steve was perched on his shoulder, having apparently become a permanent fixture. The audience went absolutely wild. Jake waved awkwardly and sat down in the oversized interview chair that had been designed for much larger species. His feet barely touched the ground. "So, Jake," Krax began, consulting his notes with the weariness of someone who'd given up trying to understand anything. "Let's start with the obvious question. How? How what? How did you survive? How did you know what to do? How are you sitting here completely uninjured after 3 days on a planet that has killed literally everyone else we've ever sent there?" Jake shrugged. "I mean, I just did camping stuff. Built a shelter, found water, made fire, avoided the dangerous animals when I could, and scared them off when I couldn't. Basic survival skills." "Basic survival skills," Krax repeated. "You befriended a venomous predator." "Steve's not that bad once you get to know him." Jake scratched Steve under what might have been a chin. Steve chirped happily. "He was just hungry and territorial. Most animals are pretty chill if you respect their space and don't act like prey." "You negotiated with the Dreadmaw using food." "Yeah, that's just bare safety. You don't run, you don't scream, you make yourself big, and if possible, you give them a reason to go away. Food works great for that." "And the volcanic eruption?" "Okay, that one was a little spicy, I'll admit. But once you know lava flows downhill and ash is bad for breathing, it's just a matter of getting to high ground and signaling for help. Pretty standard emergency evacuation stuff." Krax leaned forward. "Jake, I've consulted with our xenobiology department. They've informed me that Earth is classified as a Class 11 Deathworld. That's 1 step below Karvath 9. How is that possible? How does anything live on a Class 11? Wait, Earth is Class 11? Jake looked genuinely surprised. "That seems harsh. I mean, yeah, we've got some rough spots, but most of it's pretty nice. Good beaches, decent mountains. You can get pizza delivered almost anywhere. Your planet has weather that can kill you in minutes," Krax said, reading from a report. "Predators capable of overpowering any single human. Diseases, parasites, extreme temperatures, natural disasters, poisonous plants and animals everywhere. How did your species survive?" Jake thought about it. "I guess we just adapted. Like, we learned which plants are safe, how to deal with predators, how to predict weather, how to build shelter, and we shared that information with each other. That's kind of humanity's whole thing. We're not the strongest or fastest, but we're really good at learning stuff and teaching it to the next generation." "And the camping?" Quill interjected from his seat. "You do this for recreation?" "Oh yeah, camping's great. You get away from civilization, disconnect from technology, just enjoy nature. Some people do it hardcore with no supplies. Some people bring tents and coolers. It's a whole spectrum. My uncle's a no-supplies guy, which is why I know how to do all this stuff. Your uncle, Thress said slowly, trained you to survive hostile environments as a recreational activity. I mean, he mostly just wanted to fish and didn't like carrying a lot of gear. But yeah, same result. Krax looked at his notes again, then at the camera, then back at Jake. Jake, I need to ask you something seriously. Do humans understand how dangerous your planet is? Do you realize that you're living in constant mortal peril? Jake laughed. Dude, it's really not that bad. Yeah, there's some dangerous stuff, but you learn to deal with it. Most people live their whole lives without ever encountering a bear or a shark. And we've got medicine and buildings and technology. Honestly, the most dangerous part of Earth is probably other humans, and we're working on that. Other humans, Krax said faintly. Yeah, we can be kind of jerks to each other sometimes. But we're getting better. Mostly. The audience was silent, processing this. An entire species living on a death world, casually dealing with constant danger, and apparently their biggest threat was themselves. So, Jake said, leaning forward, do I win? Because that prize money would really help with my student loans. Krax gestured to the other contestants. The judges have deliberated. By unanimous decision, yes, Jake Hendricks, you are the winner of Survival Impossible. Applause erupted. Jake fist pumped. However, Krax continued, I am officially announcing that Survival Impossible is cancelled, effective immediately. The applause stopped. Confused murmurs rippled through the audience. I created this show to test the limits of survival, to see what beings across the galaxy were capable of when pushed to extremes. But I never anticipated humans, a species that evolved in hell and calls it home, a species that does this stuff for fun. Krax looked directly at Jake. It's not fair. It's not fair to other contestants, and honestly, it's not fair to my sanity. You've broken the show, Jake. You've broken the entire concept. Jake looked apologetic. Sorry about that. The show will be renamed Humanity Ruins Everything and will instead focus on documenting human recreational activities that would be considered death-defying on any other world. Our first episode will cover something called free solo climbing, and I'm told I will hate every second of it. The audience laughed, the tension breaking. Jake Hendricks, thank you for showing the galaxy that humans are absolutely terrifying and we should probably be very nice to them. You're free to go. Please take Steve with you. Our veterinary staff refuses to handle him. Jake stood up, Steve still on his shoulder, and waved to the audience. Thanks, everyone. This was fun. If you're ever on Earth, hit me up. I'll take you camping. As Jake left the stage, Krax turned to the camera for his final sign-off. This has been Survival Impossible. Remember, citizens of the galaxy, humans are our friends. Be kind to them, feed them if possible, and never, ever challenge them to a survival competition. They've been training their entire evolution for this, and they think it's fun. He paused, looking exhausted but somehow satisfied. I'm Krax the Magnificent, and I'm going to open that sandwich shop now. Good night, galaxy. The broadcast ended. 70 billion beings sat back in their seats, fundamentally changed by what they'd witnessed, and somewhere in the space station's corridors, Jake Hendricks was asking a maintenance worker if they knew where he could get a decent burger and whether they validated parking. Because at the end of the day, surviving a Class 12 death world was impressive, but parking fees were eternal.